Hello students, today we are going to do another very important literary term, conceit. This literary term was mainly used by the metaphysical poets. There are quite a few metaphysical poets in your syllabus. We have John Donne and we have George Herbert, and so metaphysical poetry is very important. So let's start with the literary device, conceit. As a literary device, a conceit uses an extended metaphor. We all know what is a metaphor. Metaphor means comparison between two dissimilar things. So it is an extended metaphor. It is like a metaphor and it compares two very dissimilar things. A conceit is often elaborate, great, and controls a large section of the poetry or the entire poem. Conceits are often quite unique and ingenious and can present striking juxtaposition, that is opposition and comparison of the very two different things. At this time, you can mean that the reader is strongly aware of the dissimilarities between the two things that are being compared in a metaphor, yet the conceit broadens the reader's awareness of the complexity of the things in question. A conceit therefore often contributes to a greater sophistication of understanding about the things being compared due to the surprise factor of the unusual comparison. Now, conceit develops a comparison which is exceedingly unlikely but is nonetheless intellectually imaginative, and for this reason conceits are often surprising. For example, it will not surprise us to hear someone saying, "You are a snail," or "You are a snail" is a metaphor, or if he says "You are as slow as a snail," which is a simile. But as we understand, the similarity is drawn on a common quality, that is slowness. However, we will definitely be surprised to hear someone comparing two lovers with the legs of a compass. This is very surprising. Thus, conceit examples have a surprising or a shocking effect on the readers because they are very novel or very different comparisons, unlike the conventional or the traditional comparisons which are made in similes or metaphors. Then we have the Petrarchan conceit and the metaphysical conceit, which are totally different. When scholars discuss the more technical definition of conceit, they usually break up conceit into two types. First is the Petrarchan conceit, which are named after Petrarch, who was the 14th century Italian Renaissance poet and who is also credited with the inventor of sonnets. He's called the father of sonnets. Conceits were an important feature of the Petrarchan sonnet, and even more so when the form was adopted by the poets of the English Renaissance in the late 15th century. So Petrarchan conceits are often, though certainly not always, extended metaphors that govern the structure of the entire poem, but they may also be a series of different metaphors that constitutes the bulk of the poem. Then we have the metaphysical conceit, and Donne excels in metaphysical conceits. He makes long and unlikely comparison between two things. For example, comparing a flea to a physical union of two lovers. Metaphysical conceits are to make sense intellectually rather than intuitively. So while love is like a butterfly, makes a certain amount of intuitive sense, John Donne's famous conceit is where he compares physical intimacy to a flea really only makes sense when you read the poem's complex arguments. Even in his poem, The Sun Rising, he compares the bed of the lovers to be the whole universe, and the lover, he summons the sun and says that you revolve around the earth. So now this is the earth, my bed is the earth, and you can revolve around me. Then you also have conceit in your poem which is prescribed in your syllabus, that is Go and Catch a Falling Star, where the poet compares the journey of a true beloved to the journey as dear as a pilgrimage. Now, while these two types of conceits are certainly the most common, there are conceits that fit into neither of these categories. We have Emily Dickinson, who's an American poet, for instance. She is a poet who sometimes used conceits that were neither patriarchal nor metaphysical. Further, her conceits would not be described by nearly anyone as being strained and not even being elaborate. We find a striking example of conceit in John Donne's poem The Flea. Oh, stay, 3 lives in 1 flea spare, where we almost hear more than married are. The flea is you and this a marriage bed, and the marriage temple is. So, in the above lines, the poet tells his beloved that she has no reason to deny him, as the flea has sucked blood from both of them, and their blood has mingled in the gut or the stomach of the flea. So, the flea has become their marriage bed, though they are not married. So, this is totally surprising, totally something which normally does not come into our minds. Writers use conceits for many of the same reason, to explain or describe an abstract concept in a very vivid, memorable and unique term, to help the reader to make a new, insightful connection between two entities that might not have been seem related, and to help communicate personal or imaginary experiences in terms to which readers can relate, to lead the reader to surprising and important discoveries by connecting different spheres of experience and language. Now, because conceits are very usual and unlikely comparison between two things, they allow readers to look at the things in a new way. Conceits surprise and shock readers by making far-fetched comparisons. Hence, conceit is used as a tool in literature to develop interest in the readers. Conceit was very popular literary device at one point of a time, especially in the metaphysical age, and it is not necessarily used all that much nowadays. However, many authors still like to create an unusual or even far-fetched extended metaphor that counts as a conceit example in order to surprise and intrigue their readers. Through the use of conceit, writers are able to provide a new way of looking into a situation or an object. Thank you.